amazing, inspiring. Good morning. Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, our amazing, inspiring, energetic, and spirited African youth, our honorable leaders and decision makers who came all the way to explore new opportunities and to overcome new challenges. Good morning and a very, very warm welcome from the land of civilizations. Welcome to the 14th edition of the African Economic Conference held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Please allow me, at the beginning of this very important event, I guess each and every one here in this hall understand the value of such a forum. But first, let me introduce and welcome His Excellency Mr. Tariq Amir, Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt and Governor of the African Development Bank of Egypt. Your Excellency, you're most welcomed. And we take the chance to congratulate Mr. Tariq Amir for the new credit that he just received in Egypt for expanding his delegations for a further time. Her Excellency Dr. Sahar Nasr, Minister of Investment and International Cooperation of Egypt, you're so much welcomed for your efforts and for your keenness to share. His Excellency Mr. Tariq Shawqi, Minister of Education of Egypt, you're so much welcomed. Honorable Ministers and senior governmental officials, General Khalid Fouda, Governor of South Sinai Province, General Mahmoud Sulaya, Mayor of Sharm el-Sheikh, Dr. Raymond Gilbin, Chief Economist and Head of Strategy, Research and Analysis of the United Nations Development Program, Mr. Adam El-Harika, Director of Macroeconomics and Government Decision, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Mr. Ahmed Zayed, Executive Director of the African Development Bank, and our dear partners and panelists, our very distinguished guests, and our beloved colleagues from the African Development Bank, the UNDP, and the ECA, and all the amazing and spirited youth who are gathered today for the African Economic Conference. The 2019 edition of the African Youth Forum is themed like a 3-for-3. It's organized by the three main international institutions, African Development Bank, United Nations Development Program, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And the three institutions gather and collaborated efforts for three main goals for African youth: for jobs, entrepreneurships, and capacity development for African youth. The three goals, which are perfectly aligned to the Sustainable Development Goal number 8 on inclusive and sustainable economic growth and employment and decent work for all. Let me take it from here and let me leave behind, or excuse me, leave aside all the formal delegations and opening for such a big event like this, and let it clarify as simple as we, African youth, understand it. We understand the value of the manpower of Africa. We understand the value of the great number of people. African people are exceeding like 800 million African population. More than 50% of this number are youth. The danger is there if this enormous power is incapable to find real opportunities to participate in the world economy. This is simply why we are gathered here today. Our opening ceremony agenda is quite precise. We are going to share the knowledge behind the forum, the idea behind from the decision makers, and then we're going to ask, and we're going to have a press conference by the end of this opening ceremony to explore and to give a chance for all the questions that might rise from the speeches of our honorable guests. Now, let me welcome the first opening remark from Mr. Tariq Amir, Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt. Mr. Tariq, please come to stage. Thank you.
Good morning. That's a lovely day. It's very good to be here. On behalf of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Egypt, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, I would like to extend to every one of you a warm welcome and to extend to you our wishes for a successful conference, strong deliberations, and a very productive outcome. I would like to first thank Dr. Charles Lufumba, the Acting Chief Economist and Vice President, Economic Governance and Knowledge Management of the African Development Bank, for organizing this important event. Mr. Raymond Gilpin, Chief Economist and Head of Strategy with the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. Mr. Adam El Hiraika, Director Macroeconomics and Governance in the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and His Excellency Professor Victor Harrison, African Union Commissioner for Economic Affairs. I would like also to thank the Governor of South Sinai for his entertaining our event here today and over the next few days. We are here today to discuss the jobs, entrepreneurship, and capacity development for African youths. What an incredible topic. Nothing can be more important, really, than this topic, and I thank the organizers for their choice. This is a matter that all policymakers across our continent are concerned about. And let me give you our story, because this matter is very far-reaching. Creating jobs and entrepreneurship is not a matter that you can tackle on its own. There are a lot of related issues and policy issues that needs to be addressed for this purpose. Our experience in Egypt has been really special. Our experience has started with a vision at the political leadership level, a vision for taking an economy that was completely disrupted 6 years ago, political instability, strikes, unemployment reaching 13.5%, inflation high up, eroded international reserves, currency crisis, growth levels around 2%, and a complete loss of confidence by domestic and international investors. So in this kind of environment, how can you create anything productive for the youth and entrepreneurs? The vision of our leadership, our president, was to first consolidate the confidence. And this was very intuitive, because we, people who work in the finance and economics industry, understand the value and the meaning of confidence. Political confidence and economic confidence. The spirit of the nation. How can you consolidate the spirit of the nation and revive it back? We cannot have economic development without having a positive spirit across the country. And what really was the stepping stone for that was the complete consensus of the Egyptian community behind its leadership. And this consensus gave the leadership the ability and the strength to undergo major reforms. And I understand when you're tackling a topic like entrepreneurship and capacity development, you are talking about structural reforms. And many conferences have been addressing topics as such. But the issue remains to be, and the question to be answered is how to convert this situation and to convert the vision into reality. I think a few conferences discusses the intricacies of the methods of converting the aspirations into reality. The political consensus was a stepping stone, and then we started from the political consensus into rebuilding the country's infrastructure. And some people were asking, what about education? What about healthcare? What about industry? Well, it's coming, but you are building the bricks. So we focused, and the country, the government, and the president have focused on a major program for rebuilding the infrastructure that has deteriorated and decayed and neglected over tens of years. Massive projects and programs have been executed in every side of infrastructure, whether it's roads, highways, electrical power generation, renewable energy, oil and gas, petrochemicals, ports, reconstruction of ports, a renovation of ports. All this has been a foundation for a further step and a further future to rebuild our industry. After rebuilding the infrastructure, alongside with that, there had to be a macroeconomic stabilization program. How can you have investors invest if there is a loss of confidence in the domestic currency? If there is a loss of confidence in the domestic economy, if the risk premium of the domestic economy has become so high. So a macroeconomic stabilization program that was drafted very well between the government and the central bank, and in aligning around it international investors, international financial institutions, and the International Monetary Fund. This was a complete, comprehensive, and a very aggressive program. that use the capital of the political support of the community to the political leadership. And therefore, our people have been able to withstand the side effects of such a program. As a result of this program, the currency market rebounded, became organized, the black market disappeared, international reserves reached unprecedented levels. Inflation, which had peaked at 35%, last month was 3.5%. And unemployment that had reached 13.5% hit a level of 7% and improving. The budget deficit that reached over 13% is now targeting a 7% deficit. The balance of payment, where we had a huge current account deficit of 6% of GDP, where we had a capital account outflows, a negative capital account, has transformed dramatically. Today, the government of Egypt and the authorities are working on major programs to rebuild industry and entrepreneurship, to create more employment opportunities and rebuild the skill base of labor and the educational base of the country. In order to address the challenges and effectively utilize the abundant labor resources, key labor market demand and supply side policies needed to be on the agenda. And also a dynamic business environment with streamlined regulations and access to finance. Today, this year, the government is providing a great focus on the small and medium enterprise development, boosting this industry, boosting entrepreneurship, and using all the modern tools in order to establish this foundation. With this in mind, the government implemented policies to support access to finance. And because in our reform program we had addressed a banking crisis as well, and we restructured the banking system, which becomes sound and solid, with strong capital and very high level of liquidity, we are very well positioned to implement policies to support access to finance and entrepreneurship, as well as innovation and technology. The government continued to promote and enable access to finance to all segments of the society, most notably the underprivileged, including microfinancing, where microfinancing has reached to 4 million citizens today. Small and medium enterprise financing, which represent more than 99% of active enterprises. And the banking system took a helm of that, and the central bank has imposed a minimum loan ratio on banks to small and medium enterprises, which over the last 4 years have progressed very successfully. With a particular focus on access to finance to encourage banks to become less risk averse towards MSMEs, in 2015 we issued the unified definition of MSMEs at the central bank. And as I said, we imposed a 20% target on all loan portfolios to be directed and targeted to this important, very important segment of the society. And we did not allow the banks to continue to be relaxed, focusing only on large transactions. And for this part of the financing, we have provided subsidized funds. We have subsidized the funding. It was a 15% subsidy to the small enterprise financing, which created over 100,000 new enterprises, small enterprises. Addressing the market's funding gaps, we issued regulations incentivizing banks to equity participate in private equity funds, targeting small firms, startups, and scalable enterprises. Furthermore, and to boost the MSMEs and access to finance, we have issued a 2 billion guarantee trust fund targeting the SMEs that can be leveraged up to 15 times by banks. This is a 30 billion package at the credit guarantee company that has been established by the banks and has been acquired, a big stake of it, by the Central Bank of Egypt. Mainly supporting startups, because banks are always shying away from startups. In terms of education, through the Egyptian Banking Institute and in collaboration with the Frankfurt School of Business, we have availed SME Financial Advisor Certificate, ensuring that all SME bankers are equipped with the most up-to-date financing tools and global best practices. Moreover, the development of a rating model for SMEs was tailored for the Egyptian market by the Egyptian Credit Bureau, the iScore company, in collaboration with Standard & Poor's. To promote entrepreneurship, we have taken also a number of very vigilant steps. We embarked on establishing the Nilepreneurs Initiative in order to develop value-added tools and mechanisms that can facilitate the operating environment and the ecosystem for a broad segment of small enterprises, increasing competitiveness of domestic products, consequently promoting exports and creating jobs. To facilitate and expedite growth, leveraging technology and automation has proven very critical. Hence, that's why we have embarked on supporting the development of a number of platforms, commencing from an end-to-end e-commerce agricultural platform to developing an enablers platform providing non-financial services to SMEs. And non-financial services is key, because without non-financial services, they will not be able to access financing, and to SMEs and startups. In addition to a comprehensive database for value chains and establishing linkages. Today, aspirations are not met by traditional financial services, as they constantly look for convenient financial solutions that help them define their uniqueness and enable their experiences. Because of this, we have decided to launch Egypt's FinTech and Innovation Strategy, with the vision of positioning the community as a regionally recognized FinTech hub in the Arab world and Africa. Talent, home to the next generation of financial services, talent and innovation development. The strategy identified 32 strategic initiatives, the most important of which are the key pillars coming to life in 2020. Starting with the establishment of the FinTech hub that we will utilize the iconic Central Banks of Egypt building, which reflects the bank's heritage and now marks the starting line towards the future. This will be an innovation hub that is going to embrace all talents across the community, give them the facilities and the tools, and once they achieve a marketable proposition, we are going to fund them through an equity fund that we've established for £1 billion with nucleus capital, so that they are able to convert their ideas and talent into reality. The hub will be a one-stop shop for all FinTech startups, allowing testing of new innovations, collaborations with other global FinTech hubs, transferring talent and promoting the latest FinTech trends. The hub can also be accessed online through the FinTech portal, facilitating access to the Egyptian market locally and globally. And through the FinTech portal, one can connect with the FinTech ecosystem stakeholders through the matchmaking tool and receive the latest FinTech news and job opportunities. We have worked also on a sandbox, and we created a regulatory sandbox. And I don't want to take too much of your time, but we have been taking this matter quite seriously, because we believe that creating jobs and entrepreneurship is the way forward for our economy and the best way for utilizing the economic resources in the country. I wish you a great event. I wish you have excellent deliberations, and we are very happy to have you here, and I hope you enjoy this magnificent place, this magnificent city, and we look forward always to meeting you, and we are ready to collaborate and open our doors with everybody to exchange experiences and exchange talent and exchange ideas, and let's hope the best for our people in Africa and young people, and give them all the priority and support possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tariq, for sharing with us this, not only the vision, but also the experience that the Egyptian economy have been through. The success stories shared it made me come to the awareness that every mountaintop is within reach if you just keep climbing. I think this is exactly what the African communities are doing. For many, many years, the African communities have been struggling. Lack of resources and the lack of opportunities for the African youth. Now, things have been changing in a very good way, I think. We understand the challenge, and our African countries have started already working on making the change a reality. I think this is what we are about to hear from Dr. Charles Lufumba, Chief Economist and Vice President of the Economic Governance and Knowledge Management African Development Bank. Dr. Charles, please join us to stage, and we're expecting to hear a lot from you today as you're hosting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. His Excellency, Mr. Tariq Amer, Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt and Governor of the African Development Bank for Egypt, Her Excellency, Dr. Saha Nasser, Minister of Investment and International Cooperation of Egypt, His Excellency Mr. Tariq Shoki, Minister of Education of Egypt, other honorable ministers here present, General Khaled Fouda, Governor of South Sinai Province, General Mahmoud Suleya, Mayor of Sharm el-Sheikh City, Dr. Raymond Gilpin, Chief Economist and Head of Strategy, Research and Analysis at UNDP, Mr. Adam Ehiraika, Director of Microeconomics and Governance at ECA, my boss, Mr. Ahmed Zayed, Executive Director for Egypt and Djibouti at the African Development Bank, dear partners and panelists, distinguished guests, colleagues from the African Development Bank, UNDP and ECA, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinyemi Adesina, I would like to welcome you all to the 2019 African Economic Conference, jointly organized by the African Development Bank, UNDP, and ECA. The President would have liked to be here personally with us today, but he is unable to be with us because of a conflict in meetings, with a meeting on the African Development Bank African Development Fund replenishment, which is taking place in Johannesburg just this week. But he has asked me to convey his warm welcome and best wishes for productive deliberations in finding solutions, very fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Wow, this is a very high difference, I can see. One of the things that I really like about this forum and about this conference is the language that has changed dramatically along the past period. Thanks again to Dr. Charles Lufumba for sharing this valuable information about the vision to the African youth. One thing that glimmered, one thing that captured my attention during Dr. Lufumba's speech, the strategy, the African Development Bank strategy to create 25 million jobs, to create jobs. And then, and at this point, when the question rises, all over the past period, we heard this, African youth needs help. My question to you, African youth, are we really in need for help? Do we need help? Actually, I think the thing that we really look for and aspire to is a chance. African youth, all they need is a chance. Creating a 25 million job is creating 25 million chance for African youth to inspire the whole world. I think this is the thing that we all should be looking for and we'd be proud of. Now we invite to stage Dr. Raymond Gilban, Chief Economist and Head of Strategy, Research and Analysis in the United Nations Development Program, to tell us more about his part of participation for this great initiative.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you so much, Excellencies, ministers, distinguished panelists, our very thoughtful and engaged youth. As we say in West Africa, and in the interest of time, all protocols observed. It's a great pleasure for me to be here in this wonderful city and this very beautiful and historic country. On behalf of our administrator, Mr. Akim Steiner, and the director of the Regional Bureau for Africa at UNDP, Ms. Ahuna Ezeakonwa, who unfortunately, because of scheduling conflicts, cannot be here today. I bring you warm greetings from UNDP, and thank you and our sister organizations for what I believe is going to be a very impactful 3 days of deliberation about this thorny topic that has been challenging us for so long, Africa's youth. And how do we understand Africa's youth within the context of Africa's future? Being here in Sharm el-Sheikh is a great thing. A couple of decades ago, a journalist dubbed Sharm el-Sheikh the city of peace, because back then many peace conferences were being held here. You would agree with me that Sharm el-Sheikh is now becoming the city of African development, because a lot of pivotal conferences and meetings dealing with very weighty issues relating to development on the African continent are being held here. And thank you so much once again to the government and people of this great country and this city for hosting us to discuss Africa's youth. When you read articles or you listen to the news generally, phrases like the youth bulge, the youth time bomb are what come out. Look at the adjectives that are used to describe Africa's youth: unpredictable, disenchanted, violent, problematic, and restless. No wonder we have such problems. At UNDP, we see Africa's youth as part of Africa's bright future. We see Africa's youth as Africa's opportunity. We see Africa's youth as the long-awaited positive disruptors of business as usual across the continent. This is why UNDP has launched a number of programs that focus directly on the role of Africa's youth in Africa's development trajectory. But I'd like to tell you about just one of those programs very briefly this morning, and it's called Youth Connect. And you could find out more about it if you go to www.youthconnect.org. Youth Connect has been launched in 12 African countries. This past October, we co-hosted an event in Rwanda, which was attended by over 12,000 African youth. The theme was connecting skills development to meet emerging market opportunities in Africa. Youth Connect in Rwanda had 5 goals. Youth Connect in general has 5 goals. They are, firstly, to empower. The aim is to empower 25 million young Africans with skills. Secondly, it is to nurture. The aim is to find ways to not just transfer skills, but have mentorship opportunities for 1 million African youth leaders. The third aim is to connect. We want to provide opportunities for 100 million young African leaders and thinkers to be networked and to have peer support amongst each other. Fourth goal is to close the gender gap. We don't want to leave anyone behind, particularly the woman. And the fourth is to be a catalyst to create 10 million jobs. So through Youth Connect, we want to empower, we want to nurture, we want to connect, we want to close the gender gap, and we want to create jobs. And how do we aim to do this? We aim to do this, first of all, by ensuring that the policy advice that we give helps to bridge gaps within nations and between nations, and so that not just the state-society relationships, but peer networking among Africa's enterprising youth is elevated. Secondly, we want to ensure that all our programs are tooled such that they facilitate connections and opportunities for Africa's youth. They provide platforms for not just engagement, but ideation. And they also enable us to measure results, because quite often we have a lot of great initiatives, but we have no way of telling whether or not we're making an impact. And the third way is we want to bolster partnerships. Partnerships so that innovation, so that creativity, so that assets will be shared across borders. In many ways, and fundamentally, Youth Connect reflects the next generation UNDP that our administrator, Akim Steiner, talks about all the time. One that is not okay with business as usual. One that wants to see a different Africa, one in which African youth are playing not just a pivotal role, but have a front seat in determining the continent's future. We hope that this meeting that has brought together Africa's brightest and best will be able to accomplish 4 important goals. The first is to elevate and make central the importance of African led and African-grown research, and to link that research not just to policy development, but to practice. Secondly, we hope that through this meeting, we'll be able to establish a viable and interactive network of African thinkers and African doers. And these thinkers and doers will be the innovative disruptors that we have been waiting for generations. Third, we're hoping that this platform would empower thought leaders in Africa. I'm old enough to remember the Green Revolution of the 60s and the 70s. We've gone through import substituting industrialization in the 70s and 80s. We've gone through structural adjustment. We've gone through privatization. We've gone through so many waves. But what do all of those waves have in common? They were generated and formulated outside the continent. Young people, this is your time. This is your time to define an Africa. This is your time to be empowered to think beyond borders and to think collaboratively. So thirdly, I'm hoping, and we're hoping, that we'll be able to empower Africa's thought leaders to develop the platforms that are meaningful for the future. And fourthly, it's my hope that through this program, we'll be able to emphasize the importance of digitization in Africa's development trajectory. And by digitization, I don't mean just cell phone use or internet accessibility. I'm talking about the transformative power of infotech, of biotech, of fintech in societies. How do we utilize these? And how do the young people use these as tools to recreate and reimagine Africa's future? Let me close with 3 quotes from the Youth Connect conference that we co-hosted with the government of Rwanda last October. The first says, Africa needs a new generation of problem solvers who see farther and work smarter. That was said by President Paul Kagame. The second was offered by Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba in China. He said, for Africa's youth, today is difficult. Tomorrow is even more difficult, but the day after tomorrow is beautiful. And lastly, let me quote our colleague, Assistant Secretary General and Head of the Global Policy Bureau at UNDP, Abdoulaye Mar Diaye, who said, with ideas, innovation, and passion, our youth can realize their dreams. Thank you very much.
So, using tools was the closing point of Dr. Yalban's speech, and we thank him again for that. And this is our next expected point to hear and to question. We need to hear carefully about the opportunities and the tools that the African youth can use and have the accessibility to work with, especially in the macroeconomics and the projects for the entrepreneurships. Mr. Adam El Harika, Director, Macroeconomics and Governance Division, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, please join us on stage.
His Excellency Tariq Amir, Governor of Central Bank of Egypt, Her Excellency Dr. Sahar Nasr, Minister of Investment and International Cooperation, Egypt, Governor, General Governor of South Sinai, Mayor of South Sinai, Honorable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. on behalf of Dr. Vera Songwe, the Executive Secretary of United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, it gives me pleasure to be here and to co-organize this important meeting with African Development Bank and UNDP. This is a meeting which we have been organizing since 2006, when most of us were very young. Ladies and gentlemen, recently a network of UN economists was set up by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres. And the first task of the network of UN economists, and I was proud to be one of them, was to identify the key mega trends in the global economy today. And demography and youth employment was one of the key 4 mega trends identified by the network of UN economists. The other 3 were inequality, which also affects the issues of youth, and climate change, which affects all of us, and technologies. So these are the key mega trends. And so we are here to discuss issues related to one of the key 4 mega trends in the world. Now, in Africa, as you all know, we are the next development frontier. I have no doubt we can make it. Africa can be the next development frontier. We have the endowments, we have the opportunities, and we have the commitment to be the next development frontier. And I'm saying this because when we started to work on articulating the SDGs, and we in ECA worked very closely with the African Union to articulate a new development agenda for Africa, for the first time articulated mostly by Africans. And we started with the African Common Position on post-2015 development agenda. And so we supported the team of African negotiators in New York to negotiate for a development agenda that speaks to our key needs in Africa. And our key needs as a governor of Central Bank of Egypt alluded to are to transform our economies, to stop digging natural resources and selling raw material. If we do not do this, we can talk, we can have programs, sectoral programs here and there, but we will never create the jobs our youth need. We will never be able to compete globally. So we needed a new vision, a new strategy for Africa, a strategy that is homegrown, that will help us to create jobs for everyone, that will help us add value to our natural commodities, and that will help us to compete in global markets. To start with, we need this vision, and part of this vision is articulated in Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030, transforming economies, industrializing, mobilizing the resources we need to do the things we have to do, create jobs for everyone in Africa, especially the youth. So in this context, we in the Economic Commission for Africa have been working very closely with African Union, other UN sister organization, ADB, and all the member states in Africa to make sure that African countries do have the plans, the strategies that will help them better use their resources, better articulate their priorities, and coordinate economic activities at national level. But also, work together at the regional level. So we have been working very closely with AU on the African Continental Free Trade Area. And I'm saying this to the youth, I'm getting older, because you are going to carry the flag. Regional integration is a must. And implementing the African Continental Free Trade Area is a must for us in Africa to build a market and build the opportunities and create the opportunities and build the opportunities for value addition and trade among ourselves. We articulated this very well in ECA over the years. Why? Because, and I repeated this 100 times, I'm sorry if some of you might heard it from me, when I was a postgraduate student in the UK, I used to read textbooks that tell us African countries cannot trade amongst themselves because they have similar economic structures. But today, we are proud to say that South Africa is the main trading partner for almost all countries in Southern Africa. Kenya is the main trading partner for almost all countries in East Africa, and you know the rest of the story. So we have the opportunity now, really, to integrate, to create a regional market. And most importantly, we know that you can produce manufactured goods in Egypt and sell them in the countries in the south, in Sudan, in Kenya, South Sudan, but you might not be able to sell them in Europe. So now 60% of inter-Africa exports are in manufactured products, 60%, but only 12% of our manufactured export to the rest of the world, only 12% of our exports to the rest of the world are in manufactured goods. So you see the opportunities. We need to think big in Africa as the next development frontier. We need to have the visions. We need to have the development plans and strategies. And we are working very closely with sister organizations and member states to make sure that countries have the capacity to articulate development plans that will help them create the opportunities they need to transform their economies. And in this context, as the former speakers mentioned, you need to have special programs for the youth to benefit from the digital economy and to benefit from entrepreneurship skills that need to develop in order to become entrepreneurs and employers rather than individuals who are seeking employment. So in this context, let me once again emphasize the importance of this meeting and the opportunities for youth and established researchers within Africa, in this room and beyond, to work together to look at the potential areas for African countries to create decent jobs for them and for the millions of Africans who are looking for jobs outside Africa today, instead of looking for jobs inside Africa. I wish you all very fruitful deliberation, and I look forward to 10 years down the line to say we discussed these issues in Sharm el-Sheikh in 2019, and Africa is a different place today, and I have confidence that Africa will be a different place in 10 years' time. If you look back 20 years ago, Africa was darker than it is today. So we have all the opportunities to make a difference to our continent. Thank you.
So raising the voice, interacting with policymakers, multinational firms, sharing thoughts on jobs, this is one of the main aims of this conference. This is one of the main reasons why in this conference, researchers from all the African countries below 35 years old are invited to speak up and to share their experiences and expectations. Now, the speech goes to Professor Helmer Schneider, Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Labor Economics. Please join us to stage.
Dear Excellencies, dear Ministers, dear Honorables, dear guests, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be here today, and I think I have a special role to play here. It was just introduced. My institute is a research institute located in Germany, and we are running an international network of researchers that are dealing with labor market issues. And our special mission is to be a bridge builder between research and society. We want to make a contribution such that scientific evidence finds its way to those who are in charge of taking political decisions. And we want to help those people in responsibilities to make better and more informed decisions. The picture looks a bit strange. It's very reddish. Normally it should be blue, but anyway, I hope this doesn't make a difference. Well, youth unemployment is one of the most pressing problems in many African countries, as you know, and it's a serious obstacle towards economic development. According to the African Union's Agenda 2063, youth unemployment will be eliminated, and Africa's youth guaranteed full access to education, training, skills and technology, health services, jobs, and economic opportunities. This is an ambitious goal, even though the period until 2063 seems to leave a lot of time in order to get things done. It is often argued that the provision of education is the key prerequisite for triggering growth and wealth of a society. Although this is true, there is an implicit assumption behind it, which is often overlooked. Providing education will only yield the expected outcomes if people are willing to invest their precious time into education. Convincing young people that holding up the possibility of earning money now in order to make more money later due to better education requires quite a number of preconditions in itself. It's all about a fundamental principle in economics. It's about the efficient allocation of resources. So, and what does that mean? First of all, people need to rely on the returns of their investments. This does not only hold for capital investments of firms, it equally applies to people's investment into their skills. This requires reliable institutional settings which effectively prevent discrimination, corruption, and violent destruction of resources. And the second thing that is equally important here is families need to be reasonably insured against the fundamental risks in life by social insurance or something in that domain. Without social insurance, families need to secure themselves on their own, which often leads to the phenomenon that parents send their kids to the fields and to the factories instead of sending them to school. Growth and wealth in many industrialized countries, as Germany, where I'm coming from, is closely related to the introduction of social insurance and welfare systems. You probably know better than me that these conditions are weakly met in many African countries. But the absence of these conditions has substantially negative consequences on the potential to grow. And there's one striking piece of evidence, in my view, that sheds light on the link between patience and economic growth. You might be surprised by the term patience. From an economic point of view, it means time preferences. There's a very enlightening paper by Armin Falk and a number of co-authors from IZA recently published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. And among else, they look at the distribution of patience around the globe. To what extent people are willing to postpone instantaneous consumption in favor of consumption at a higher level in the future. That's what this paper is all about. Unfortunately, maybe you can see it better. Maybe my view is distracted because I see it from this steep angle. But what this slide shows you is there's a huge variation of patience around the globe. Those countries marked in blue are countries with a high level of patience. This is measured on a Likert scale from 0 to 10. People who are very patient, willing to postpone things in favor of consuming more in the future. These countries are blue. Countries with a low level of patience are marked in red. And what you can see is the more patient people are in a country, the wealthier the country is. Patience means the willingness to invest into the future. Patience is most likely not a genetic issue. It's a matter of culture and life experience. Patience is a direct outcome of institutional stability that makes people feel safe with regard to saving and investing. Hence, patience is something that can be achieved by the right institutional settings, but it can equally be destroyed by the wrong institutional settings. Unfortunately, reliability of institutions with regard to safeguarding the property and interest of individuals is violated in many African countries. The main sources of unreliability are discrimination of women and ethnic groups, corruption and nepotism, terrorism and violence. These forces are not only destroying people's trust into the future, they also massively destroy efficient allocation of resources. And without an institutional framework protecting people's investments, people will not invest into their future. Providing free elections is by far not enough. What is required beyond is a guarantee of individual freedom, the protection of individual property, and the clear separation of legislative, jurisdictional, and executive powers. Wealth for everyone is possible. But it will only be realized if human resources as well as material resources are brought to their best possible utilization. Building schools at universities and establishing vocational training schemes will only work in an environment where people can rely on the return of their investment. However, and here's something that I would like to tell as an experience from where I'm coming from, the European Union, even if you have the right institutional environment, an expansion of the educational infrastructure has its obstacles. And this is a slight warning. One can, even if you invest in educational infrastructure, a lot of things can go wrong, and I just would like to prevent you from making or repeating these mistakes that we are currently experiencing in Europe. About 10 years ago, the European Union decided to expand academic education substantially. 2 decades ago, the fraction of youth who achieved an academic degree in European member states used to be between 10 and 20%. Since then, this fraction has rapidly increased, and in many countries it has now reached a level of almost 50%. However, the promise that this would secure youth against the risk of unemployment has not come true. If you take a closer look, it becomes apparent that a large part of the expansion of the academic training was in social sciences, arts, and the like. The academic system has brought about armies of sociologists, political scientists, journalists, fashion designers, and the like. What would have been needed instead is engineers and IT specialists, medical doctors, and so on. As a result, youth unemployment is still high, and among these unemployed youth, you will find a large fraction of excellently trained academics with a specialization that the markets simply cannot absorb. Hence, the academic expansion has brought about a lot of heavily disappointed youth who feel betrayed about their future. However, they are perfectly trained in expressing their protest. And the reason behind this dilemma is that governments might have a different objective function than the economy. Instead of promoting training according to market needs, governments tend to direct funding in order to maximize the number of students. The fact that producing a medical doctor is way more costly than producing a social scientist seems to create a structural incentive to invest in mismatch. And the lesson to be learned from this is education is not a purpose in itself. The expansion of the educational infrastructure will only work if it is carefully adjusted according to the needs of labor markets. And to conclude with, 4 decades are not much time for meeting all the requirements I have been talking about. Moreover, waiting with investment in educational infrastructure until all the institutional settings have been accomplished that will stimulate the willingness of people to invest into the future is not an option, of course. But investing in educational infrastructure without improving the reliability of institutions is a waste of money too. So doing both at the same time is the only option. And my sincere hope is that African youth will appreciate the willingness of governments if they seriously go into that direction. Thank you very much for your attention, and that's it from my side.
From my perspective, I can see a huge watch here. It's showing that we passed an hour, so thank you for your patience. And we're about to finish, but ending this opening ceremony with a very important and promising model. Egypt was chosen as a host country for this huge economic event as president of the African Union, and providing a successful African example of economic reformation that made it recently recorded as the most attractive African country for foreign investment in 2019 in the International Financial Institutions Annual Report. This is something that we would like to hear more about from Dr. Sahar Nasr, the Minister of Investment and International Cooperation of Egypt and alternate governor of AFDB. Dr. Sahar, please join us to stage.
I have to confess it's a bit challenging being last after 5 influential and men with a lot of substance. So here I go. Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here, and welcome to the beautiful city of Sharm el-Sheikh, land of peace and security. And I want to especially thank UNDP, the African Development Bank, but also the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa for choosing Egypt as the host country for this event. And before I start my statement, I want to especially congratulate His Excellency Tarek Amir, the governor of the Central Bank of Egypt, for the vote of confidence and for his reappointment as the governor of the Center of Egypt, which we're very proud of. It's also the vote not just of His Excellency the President, but of the market. So here, applause of that. So I was just saying it's a bit challenging also even highlighting the major reforms that Egypt undertook over the past years. I think His Excellency, the governor, has highlighted that in depth, but let me also say what are the key messages that I will leave this event with. Number one, Africa has great opportunities, and I think that's very important. Even according to the IMF, 6 out of the 10 fastest growing economies are African countries. So this is an important number that we need to reflect on. 62% of the African population are youth, and that's the future. So that's a very important figure that we also need to reflect on. In terms of FDI, Africa has been one of the most continents that has been attracting. So despite the decline in FDI globally by 13%, in fact, Africa's FDI has picked up at 11%. So these 3 numbers are very promising numbers that we need to be our takeaways, and from there, let's see. Indeed, the selection of youth as the main topic, the entrepreneurship, the jobs, and the opportunities for our continent is key. And here I'm going to also reflect on statements that His Excellency President Sisi has highlighted just a few days ago at the African 2019 event, the Investment Forum. And not only as the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, but also as the Chairman of the African Union. The vision that he has put there in his leadership was empowerment of youth and the role of the entrepreneurship ecosystem. Second, the importance of infrastructure, because with the endorsement and effectiveness of the Free Trade Agreement of Africa and the mobility of goods and people and better access to markets, how can young people make use of this very important step? And third, the role of the private sector. And here, that's very important. We are all here to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth, and we want to make sure that the private sector and the investors play a pivotal role on that. Yes, indeed, as one of the speakers has highlighted, Africa is the next development frontier, for sure. And our youth are the future and the innovators and the opportunities for our continent, and they will be leading our growth. So, what has Egypt done in that endeavor? And here I also want to say that the 100 startups, the African 100 startups, we celebrated that also in Sharm el-Sheikh just 1 year back at the Africa 20. And that was also in partnership with the African Development Bank, with the IFC and the World Bank. And we are very proud of the African startups who are leading the initiatives globally. And we also managed to do a follow-up just last week, and His Excellency President Sisi made sure that during the event that he does meet with the startups and discusses with them one-on-one to see what are their challenges, what are their needs, and how can the government cater that. So there is commitment at the highest political level from the president, but also from all the African leaders to our young youth, because they are the future. Egypt, we have made sure that we have the right ecosystem in place, the conducive, enabling ecosystem in place. And I here will start with what His Excellency the Governor has highlighted, which is access to finance. And even before access to finance, making sure that we have the sound macroeconomic framework. And indeed, As His Excellency indicated, a prerequisite is a sound and stable macroeconomic fundamentals, because without that we cannot bring the investment in and we cannot support the young entrepreneurs. With major monetary and fiscal reforms, we've managed to achieve macroeconomic stability. So that was one key pillar of the economic reform program, and that was a major success that has been acknowledged by all institutions globally. And in fact, Egypt is always referred to as an exemplar of a successful implementation of a reform that has been home-driven, and home-designed, and done in consultation with our people. That's why there has been consensus. Despite the challenging times, there has been consensus to proceed. One key pillar was making sure that the environment is conducive for private sector-led growth, but also for young entrepreneurs. So while the government was going through major legislation and legal reforms, we made sure that the investment law, there is one clear article that supports small and medium enterprises, and that provides them with the tax and non-tax incentives to make sure that they have the right packages so that they're able to start their own business and to be job creators and not job seekers. So the law was very clearly there, providing 50% tax exemptions from the investment costs for 3 years, extendable for another 3 years, with an aggregate of 6 years. Not only that, but also, Minister, we want to highlight that also even the amendments of the companies law, we wanted to make sure that we added one chapter that is there for the proprietorship, a single company, which encouraged a lot of those who were operating in an informal sector to formalize and to benefit from the various packages that were provided, not just by the government, but more important, the package that was provided by the Central Bank of Egypt, the subsidized credit for the SMEs, which has played a pivotal role in improving their access to finance. So on financial inclusion, which is a strategy that was launched here also in Sharm el-Sheikh 1 year back by the central bank, but also with all non-bank financial institutions participating effectively. Banking are critical, not only in Egypt, but in Africa. They account for more than 90% of the financial system's assets, and hence their support is very important. However, we also worked on making sure that the non-bank financial institutions that is supervised by an independent regulatory authority that also amends the capital markets law, the financial leasing, and the factoring, and microfinance law for the first time in Egypt, a law that is also governing this to make sure that financial inclusion is really inclusive of banks and non-bank financial institutions. I was also very proud yesterday at the ICT conference to see the innovation that took place in a lot of the financial instruments, especially fintech, which is the governor has highlighted in his opening speech. This is where there is a platform for all innovative young entrepreneurs who have great ideas and need some support to transform these ideas into reality, into a real project on the ground. And this is where also the Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation established Egypt Venture, and also Fikretak Shirketak, which is an incubator and an accelerator that provides the non-bank financial services that they need. Large companies have the skills and have the funding to get the best legal advisor, the best auditor. But young entrepreneurs need the financial system to be complemented with advisory service to make sure that their projects are successfully implemented and are success and not a burden. The IFIs, the international financial institutions, have played a very important role also in providing domestic liquidity, in supporting us. Many have been working very closely with a lot of our banking system whether state-owned banks or private banks. They've also been supporting NGOs to provide microfinance for the micro companies that will, obviously, with a lot of support from the government, will be able to graduate from micro to small and from small to medium. And this is what we're trying to do and accomplish in Egypt. We also wanted to make sure that red tape and bureaucracy has been addressed. So we wanted to make sure that the business environment is conducive for small enterprises. So we put together, jointly with the Ministry of Trade and Industry and all the sector ministries, a map that gives equal access to the investment opportunities so that there is a level playing field and they have equal access to markets and there is no privilege to the large. And I wish you all the best in the coming few days, and I wish all the success in the discussions of the panel so that we're able to put together key initiatives that we're all able to work together and to support. And I also want to, again, say that together we will be able to achieve not only the goal 8 in the SDGs, but not only the agenda for the 2063 for Africa, but meet the aspirations of all our young people and the future generation. Thank you very much, and wish you all the best.
So thank you again for your patience. This was a big opening ceremony with heavy talks, yet a very valuable talks and speeches. Thank you for all our honorable speakers who shared their vision to the African youth. We repeat our thanks to each and every one of you in this hall. And as we used to say it, let the fun begin. But not only the fun, the discussion panels and the workshops, the meetings, the seminars, and changing and exchanging ideas will just start from now, all over 3 days from now, to inspire and find new opportunities and new ways. I understand that many reporters have many questions now, so we announced that we have a press conference just after 30 minutes from now. Now you can have a break, enjoy your coffee for 30 minutes, and then we will join again in the press conference room next to this hall. Thank you so much.